was appointed in October 2019. He manages a $17.3 billion budget, 22,000 employees, 50,000 lane miles of pavement, 20,000 bridges. 20,000 bridges, 400 public use airports, busy intercity rail systems, and transit support for 200 agencies. Director Omishakin's transportation vision for California is for a safe, equitable, sustainable, and multimodal transportation system that builds on strong local partnerships. He and his leadership team have established 5 priorities for the department in 2019 and 2020, finalized a new strategic plan, which is much simpler, I must say, than the old one, straightforward, and to focus on Caltrans' foundational principles of equity, climate action, and safety. He was born in Knoxville, Tennessee. He and his wife have 2 children, completing a PhD in engineering management from Tennessee, Knoxville, and a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Jackson State University, and Bachelor of Arts in engineering technology from Mississippi Valley State University. And with that, great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, John. Thank you. How is everybody? You guys good? Yeah, good. It's great. It's very good to be on your campus. I've had a chance to hang out with John and Dan, and where's Dan? And so on. Yeah, in the back of the room a little bit, and doing some surveying and some research on bicyclists as we have lunch outside. So a little bit of student work happening already. So it's really good to be here. I'm excited to share a little bit with you, the students, the future leaders, the current and future leaders of transportation and engineering in California and probably the rest of the country as well. So what I want to do is share a little bit more detail about some of the things that John mentioned in the introduction. Can you guys hear me clearly? You hear me well? Okay, good. I know I can't take my mask off. I want to so bad. Share a little bit more detail about some of the things that John shared, but also a little bit of insight into myself and my journey until how I got to a place like I am today. And so before I get into a little bit of what we do, I'm going to try to get in the middle of the room a little bit. Hopefully some of you can hear me more. I know it's going to make it hard for some of you to turn around, but a little bit of my journey. I'll start just a little bit far back. I was, like John said, I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Nigerian parents who were in academia. They got their doctorate degrees at University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And when I was a toddler, they moved back to Nigeria. So I was like 3 or 4 years ago. So I grew up in West Africa. And I came back to America when I was in high school. And it was one of I see some students that may be foreign students here. I met James earlier, who's from Ireland. James, you made this transition at a perfect time. I came when I was 15. Imagining what that was like to come. And I lived in the southern part of the country. I lived in North Carolina and Mississippi. And coming from Africa in the early 90s, it was like fish out of water. It was like, what in the world is going on in this place? It was quite unique. But I went on to study engineering technology. As I said, John said, got a master's in urban planning. I was fortunate because at an event just like this, a luncheon just like this, the director of planning for the city of Nashville was at my graduate school at Jackson State University to give a talk about transportation and planning, just like this, almost 20 years ago now, or a little over 20 years ago. And I was sitting in a room just like this 20 years ago. And I remember looking at him saying, boy, I'm so scared to say a word to him, but I want to so bad. And I talked to one of my professors and he said, now, before he runs, you got to go talk to him and give him your card. And I went to him and I gave him my card. And he said, oh yeah, whenever you finish, whenever you get done with your master's thesis or in the middle of finalizing it, just give me a ring. We're going to have some jobs open. And that's exactly what I did. It was in, gosh, 2000 or 2001. I think it was 2000. And I gave him my, I did exactly what he did. Actually, what I did was every 3 months, I would send him an email. Hey, Mr. Bernhardt, things are going well in grad school. I still want to come to Nashville. And I just kept doing it until I graduated. When I graduated, I interviewed and I got a job in Nashville as the city's first bicycle and pedestrian coordinator. Nobody had ever had that job before in the whole state of Tennessee's history. Somebody that their sole responsibility every day was to make sure bikes, peds, transit had interconnectivity and would work together. There was a new mayor in the city who said he wanted to make that a focus. So I was the first guy ever to have that job. I was extremely fortunate. And I say I was fortunate because all the other jobs I applied for, they were just regular planning jobs. I mean, they were like, I'd do zoning, like a new Walmart's coming in, approve or no approve. So imagine doing that every day to like one of the coolest jobs that's impacting the entire world today. How fortunate I was 20 years ago to not go down that path of, oh yeah, a new zoning ordinance is coming in and I'm approving a new development or whatever. The routine stuff that happens to, like, to me, one of the coolest opportunities ever. So I did that for the city of Nashville for 6 or 7 years. And then a new mayor got elected, Carl Dean, who said he wanted to elevate even more the issues of people who are vulnerable users of transportation. He wanted to elevate it even more to be in the office next to his office, in the mayor's office. And he was like, who does that for the city? And they were like, well, there's this guy named Toks at the planning department. And the next thing you know, I'm sitting down across from the mayor, I'm getting interviewed to leave the planning department to come and be in his office, overseeing planning, public works, parks, and all the other things related to it. And so I was nervous as hell because that decision, I remember praying with my wife about it. That decision was, I knew it was going to change my life if I made it, because I was no longer going to be the guy in the cubicle doing technical work. Now I was about to become a policymaker. I was about to become a decision maker, speaking on behalf of a major US city mayor. And I was so scared. I was like, I'm not sure I want to do this. But prayed about it and took the leap and decided, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this. And I went to go work for the mayor. That only lasted, probably about 3 years or a little over 3 years in the mayor's office. And one of the things that happened to me was I started growing in my level of comfort with engaging people, in connecting with people. And while I was working for the mayor of Nashville, I met the mayor of a small suburban city, kind of like Sacramento is to Davis. I met the mayor of a city called Franklin, Tennessee, suburb of Nashville. And that mayor later became the director of transportation for the state of Tennessee. And when he became the director of transportation for the state of Tennessee, he was looking to build out his team, who would be over all the modes, transit, walking, biking, environmental issues, planning issues. So I got the call 10 years ago. Now to come and head up for the state of Tennessee DOT, modes, planning, da, 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 da. So I did that for 8 years, being the #2 guy at Tennessee DOT. And the next thing you know, I'm getting a call from the governor's office in California to come to California. So a little bit of my journey, but one of the things I can say, and I'll talk about this at the end a little bit more. One of the things I can say clearly for sure that's made a difference for me is I've paid a lot of attention to honing my understanding of the technical skills that are required to do the work. You know, remember I started out as a bike ped coordinator, so I was using AutoCAD and GIS to design things for the city. So I had to really get good at that. But what I paid a lot of attention to was that ability to, along the way, to connect and engage people beyond understanding the technical work. And again, I'll talk about this at the end, but as you look to leave this campus and move on, know your stuff. Don't get me wrong, you gotta know your stuff. And all of you, for you to be at Davis, I know you guys are brilliant in the first place. But beyond that, you've got to be able to understand if you want to go on to change the world. And I believe many of you will, if you want to, that part of being able to develop the skills to be able to engage people and connect with people is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. All right, so I shared with you already my background, grew up in Nigeria, but part of what shaped me as well along the way. Can some lights be dim, like front lights, or not really? So you can see it more. If not, that's okay. It just these two up here can just be done. Part of what's, yeah, that's perfect. That's great. What's influenced my upbringing is knowing that the decisions that I'm making will not only influence the things I have responsibility of here, but how it can influence things around the world. This picture was taken in 2017, one of the recent visits I had to Nigeria. This is my father in this image, and this is his sister and uncle and aunt. And I'm the goofy dude with the hat on the left there. When this picture was taken, I remember the person saying, "Everybody smile." And I didn't know it at the time, but when I looked back at the image, I noticed my dad, who, again, most of his life in the US. Well, not most of it. He went to graduate school in the US. I was born in the US, most of my life in the US. These three people have lived in the country their entire time. And John spent time in Nigeria as well. But one of the things that I immediately noticed when I looked back at the picture was I was smiling, my dad was smiling, they were not. The life that people live on in the country, in that continent, if you were to experience it, it's something that I can't actually put in words. It is, some of these people are some of the happiest people in the world, but this life is so tough. There's so many things that we take for granted that we have here in America that are luxuries over there. And every time I see this picture, it influences me, it keeps me honest. It helps me remember, don't forget where you came from. Not everybody in the world has access to and the opportunities to the things that you have access to. This image reminds me of it. It's extremely innocent. It's just one thing that just happened, but I held on to it, and it helps shape my thinking whenever I get caught up in things not being able to move forward in this country that we love so dearly. So that's part of what's influenced and shaped me. So if you're not from California, a little bit more about this state and the great things and responsibilities that Caltrans in particular has responsibility for. Can you guys still hear me well? You still can? Okay, perfect. So 40 million people, you've heard all these statistics before, fifth largest economy in the world. You heard John describe some of the responsibilities we have. 20,000 bridges, 400 public use airports. We also have more than 600 buildings that Caltrans owns. We have a responsibility for more than 100 tunnels. There are more tunnels in California than any other state in the country. Also have 12,000 vehicle fleet of more than 12,000 that our department is responsible for as well, 12,000 and growing. But one of the things that I think is really unique about the state is the diversity of the state as well. I can look around this room, it's pretty impressive as well. The diversity is pretty cool to see. But the Latino population in most states, it's not the majority. In California, it actually is. And the Asian American population is one that's growing. African American population, I think, still probably hovers around 6% roughly. But the diversity of the state, I think, is part of what its strength is. And we at Caltrans, we're trying to keep that in mind, the uniqueness of the state in mind as we continue to develop and grow this massive transportation system that we are responsible for. I'll tell you that this 50,000 lane miles is not actually the largest in the country. Caltrans has the largest budget and the largest staff. So we're 22,300 people work for my department now, and it's a little over $17 billion budget, but there are states who have a larger system. Texas is one, for example, that is 2 times larger, almost 2 times larger than California, I think. And other states, even smaller states like South Carolina and Virginia, they're smaller geographically, but they are also responsible for the local roads. So the neighborhood streets, the state DOT, which is odd to me. The state DOT is responsible for not only the state highway system, but county and local roads as well. So their responsibility is larger. This is just strictly the state highway system. This has no local streets, no county streets. This is all strictly state. So John mentioned the fact that we have a new strategic plan, and that strategic plan is very understandable. It's very different from the way it's been in the past, and there's some intentionality to that. Before, pretty long, a lot of things that we're going to be focused on as far as goals. But I really wanted to I really wanted to simplify it and make it something that people can grasp and hold on to. And we've essentially boiled down this really big, sort of meaty thing into 3 things that we call it 3 foundational principles. And I'll get a chance to go into detail on a little bit of this, but this is quite unique, I'll tell you, for a state DOT. I can promise you, when you go to the other 49, these 3 things won't be the primary focus of what the department does. Just doesn't happen. I recently hosted the 49 other Tokses at an event in, still in Dan this earlier, at an event in San Diego 2 weeks ago. It's called the AASHTO National Conference. So all the other state DOTs were in California for a meeting. And these items are heavily discussed in several meetings, but this was not the focus. Before I go into detail on this in some of the other slides, I'm excited, and you guys should be as well, about the fact that we're in a place when it comes to infrastructure and transportation and engineering we've never been before. And when I say that, I've seen now, since I've been a part of this industry, I've seen or been a part of indirectly or directly 4 transportation bills, infrastructure bills. This one, called IJA, nicknamed IJA, is the first time. First of all, it's the biggest one ever, $1.1 trillion. But it's the first one where policy and funding are actually being aligned together to try to hit some of these goals. When the president came in office in January, and Buttigieg was appointed the Secretary of Transportation, and I got a chance to spend a little bit of time with the team. I was the only state DOT director that was on the transition team to help President Biden put in place the next team of people who are going to lead transportation for the country. When all the discussions were happening, without going into detail, when I started hearing this was going to be the focus for them, I was so pumped, because this was already what I was focused on in Caltrans. The things that I was already leading the way on. And so this transportation bill that has come in, it's going to, there are some people who are not happy. They're not pleased that it's gone far enough. And true, it could have gone further. The initial proposal compared to what got passed, you can't even compare. It's shrunk quite a bit. And there's some key policy areas that were eliminated as well. One of them, just quickly, is on this point, on the equity fund front. The initial proposal from the president was for a $24 billion effort across the country to create a program called Reconnecting Communities. And through all the discussions and back and forth with Congress, that $24 billion program that's focused on this issue, it's now $1 billion. So I could go on. There's a long list of things that got shrunk from March or April when the initial proposal came out from the president to what passed last week. But I'll take it. I'll take it. When I say I'm excited, this has never happened before. It's either one or the other at the national level. Either you've got the money, but there's no policy backing, or the other way around. You got the policy backing, but nobody's got money. We got both. We got both now. So this is pretty exciting. I'll talk about these three foundational principles a little bit more. But before the three foundational principles, before we established them as a team, these were the 5 priorities that we were being guided by. When I came in October of 2019, my goal was to try to get to as large a state as we have. My goal was to try to get to almost every single part of the state as fast as I possibly could. This is pre-pandemic. So essentially I was living out of a suitcase for 3 months. I was everywhere because I wanted to see people, talk to people, understand what the challenges are in the state, not sit in my office in Sacramento. And through a lot of that engagement externally and internally with this massive team, I said, here's what we should focus on. And we were fortunate that we were able to get this done right in time before the pandemic hit. So by January of 2020, this was going out, being pumped out to the entire staff, to the entire state, that here are the 5 things we're going to focus on every single day. It should be our sort of guiding light for our team. And when I say we were fortunate, when you don't have a sense of direction, imagine you're walking or biking or driving and you have no idea where you are. And then all of a sudden, a storm hits. What does that do to you? Is it because you guys just had lunch? You're disoriented. Even more. I mean, you're driving or you're biking or whatever, you're already lost, and then a storm hits. Having this vision outlined before the pandemic, before the storm hit, was so critical. If we didn't have a sense of, okay, here's what this new leadership, here's what this new director and this team, here's what they want to do. If that wasn't put in place before the pandemic, before the storm hit, we would have been a mess. But this helped quite a bit because the transition we had to make, we were a department that had maybe 100 people teleworking regularly. We had to shift from 100 people to 15,000 people. We had to order 15,000 laptops in a month to get people into a digital world. Imagine what that laptop order was like. Dell, whoever it was like, yes. So that's the kind of transition we had to make. But this was important to have this established before we went into that digital, completely shifted into that digital world. And a part of what we also did as a team that we've been working on, I mentioned these foundational principles, but these foundational principles came from this document, the strategic plan. This is the document that guides how we do our work internally as a department every day. So it's a 5-year outlook for the things that we're going to be focused on. And then we also finalized in 2020 as well, in 2021, most plans finalized in 2021, the state's long range plan. This is more of a visionary document. It's a 30-year, 25, 30-year horizon. So 2050 goes out to 2050. Okay, here's what we are expecting the future of transportation to be for California. So this is more of a visionary planning document, not a lot of it's not project focused or funded, but a lot of sort of guiding elements were established in early 2021 as well for the direction of transportation. One of the things that we are paying a lot of attention to the foundational principles is how we're going to make sure that in every single phase of what we do, equity and climate action and safety is embedded. It's not easy to embed those concepts and those ideas in an organization. I like to compare it to, John had a reference to this earlier, an ocean line. I mean, imagine being in an ocean liner and trying to say X nautical miles we're going to make this turn. I mean, you have to start planning those nautical miles several miles ahead. Versus you're in a speedboat and you're just like, oh yeah, or turn around. It's almost the same thing. The larger the organization is, the more complicated, the more challenging it is to embed these thoughts and principles in every phase of what we do. So people who are in my job, typically, they don't last too long. They're 2 years, a year, and they're gone. I'm the 33rd director over a 106-year period. I never did this math before. So yeah, you can do the math. That's about an average of a little over 3 years that somebody is in a job. So this is so critical because part of why people never, one, it's not the highest paying job in the world. You don't do this job for nothing. It's about the service and the ability to be able to make a difference and have an impact. That's what the opportunity is about. But if you're committed and you really believe in that, there's always a possibility that somebody may come after you, or a regime or leadership may come after you and say, that Toks guy, what was he thinking about? That's nuts. And so if that happens, you want to try to make sure you embed those principles as much as you can without a long time, because you don't have a long time. Rarely there's people stay in these jobs for 8 years. One of my friends who talked to me about the job before, I said, yes, he actually did it for 7. Malcolm Dougherty was one of the former directors. That's an eternity to stay in this job. So part of my focus and our leadership team's focus is this window where we've got this money and we've got the policy. Let's make sure we embed it in every phase of what we do. So for transportation, when it comes to equity specifically, we're going through this phase of understanding a little bit more what's happened here. We spent a lot of time, probably mostly in these 2 places, but we're going through in transportation, I believe, in reckoning and understanding the past, which is leading to an awakening that's going to help make sure that the future is different. The future is brighter and different. And this past, we were going crazy. I mean, you guys are, most of you are graduate students, and okay, so you guys know the story already. I mean, we spent 50 years thinking this was cool. You guys are not going to do that to us. You're not going to make this happen to us. We essentially, I need to be careful. I'm not going to use the word gut.
You are being recorded.
We just built giant freeways all through the country. And the country we were copying, people don't know this. The country we were emulating with us, where Eisenhower got the idea from, was Germany. What the Germans did that was unique. You can go back and look at some of the old maps. What they did, instead of going right through the city, they built their freeway system almost kind of like you build bypasses in America. So here's your major urban city. They will build it around it and build smaller connectors into the city. In America, we said, let's run the thing over. Like, where do the poor people live? Where do the less influential live? That's where we're going. The Germans were smart enough not to do that. And so that's the past. For the present, I became one of the first states. We became one of the first states to put out an equity statement saying we recognize that this was wrong and it had detrimental impacts to many people, and that in the future we're going to do it differently. Not that the future necessarily looks like this, but it's more mobility focused, not car focused. So this is a commitment we made, one first statement, to put out an equity statement for the department saying we're committed to a future that looks different. So to start to get into a few specifics, let's just dig a little bit deeper. I haven't looked at some of these graphics in a long time. But when you start to think about safety and its implications from a transportation standpoint, it's clear, just like in many other areas, the impacts lean one way more than the other. That it's hurting certain people, marginalized or underserved people who live in our communities more than others. So for example, if you take this middle graphic, more likely to be killed in a pedestrian crash. What's the African American population in California again? 6%, 5 to 6%. The likelihood that you get killed. Likely to be killed in a bicycle crash. Let's see what some of the numbers look like. More likely to be killed in a traffic crash. So not surprising that this not surprising on this number, the Latino population in the state is actually the largest population, but still, not sure why we don't have the.
I think that's the baseline that they're comparing to.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's true. That's why they're not at the bottom. Very good point. Yeah, comparing all of these to the bottom, the white population being the baseline that this is being compared to. So again, work to do. So beyond safety, climate obviously being another thing. Part of the reason why I got excited about the opportunity to leave Tennessee and come and be a part of this organization, Caltrans, was because of this issue, this very issue. There are certain parts of the country where the words climate change is taboo. There's actually a governor, a former governor, I'm not going to name the state, who in a state said that he's banning the word climate change from any documents. Like you can't use it in the transportation department, environment department, can't use the word climate change. So that's a little bit of the background that I came from. So a lot of the work I was doing was uphill to when I got the call from the state of California. It's like, not like, one of the things we want to do is completely hammer home the changes we need to make in the climate change arena, and have climate action, have a climate action plan. I was like, sign me up. Have you guys seen some of the highlights from COP26? You guys pay attention to the last COP? Yeah. You guys are like, what is that? Yeah, okay. Some people don't. Okay, so here's what's going on. And most of you notice already, from a climate action standpoint, when you break down the economic sectors, transportation is essentially 50% of the problem in the whole state. In the olden days, they used to be about this and a lot of this. But it was like the smoke chimneys everywhere. That's what's causing the problems. The industries, manufacturing. That's no longer the issue. It's us. We in this room. That's why Davis and the things that are happening here from a walkability and bikeability standpoint are pretty cool. As an example for the rest of the country. We've got to do more in this space. Now, there's a lot of energy being put into Dan and all of us who were talking over lunch, being put into turning over the vehicle fleet for the country to become cleaner. I think that's admirable. I mean, that's a huge thing. The OEMs, the manufacturing industry, they're all on board. I mean, we talked about it at length. The governor put out an executive order climate week in September of 2017, September of 2020, the last executive order, executive order 7920. If you haven't had a chance to look at it. Essentially says every car manufactured in California, manufactured and sold in California by the year 2035 has to be electric. So has to be zero emission. Big difference. So it could be any other form of clean energy. Every single light duty vehicle. So we're 13 years essentially away from that being the case. That's an admirable goal. The industry is going to get there. They're already getting there. Tesla is kind of pushing the envelope. But I think in the meantime, we still bear a responsibility to make sure that mobility options exist for people beyond the car. Because when you think about transportation holistically, Teslas, as great as they are, as amazing as they are, if we don't create more mobility options for people and goods to be able to get about, Tesla is still going to be sitting in traffic. Now, it may not be emitting at the level, obviously not emitting at the levels that an ICE vehicle is, a combustion engine vehicle is. But when you start to think about quality of life for people, which is a big part of our responsibility as well, it's not just getting from A to Z. We want people to have a better quality of life overall as well. That's part of our responsibility. You don't want them sitting in traffic. Hence, the need to not let up on creating mobility choices for people and just focusing on what's under the hood of a vehicle. So we've got more work to do in transportation. So I mentioned this already, Governor, successive governors, Governor Brown, Governor Schwarzenegger, they were all huge on this, national, international leaders on this. And part of what's really exciting about what's happening. But again, this is not the end all be all. Let's not get lost here. It's a big step. It's a huge step for the country that we're starting to lead the globe. We're up to now, I believe by the end of this year, we're going to be at a point where there are 1 million ZEVs sold in California. Mind you, the national number is 2.2 million right now. So 47% to 48% of the entire ZEV vehicles sold in America right here in California. It's amazing. We're 10% of the country's population, but almost 50% of ZEVs. So 900 vehicles sold. We're at 940,000 last time I checked, last month. 940,000 ZEVs sold in the state. Nearly 700,000 of them actually stayed in the state. So not all of them stayed. Some of them end up leaving the state. But just impressive. It now represents, listen to these key facts. The ZEV market now represents the #1 export from California. #1 export of roughly $5 billion. That's the value of the ZEV market. There were some other key things I wanted to mention. But nevertheless, impressive things that are happening. Connected and autonomous vehicles. 6 or 7 years ago, when I started paying a lot of attention to this space, a lot of the OEMs, a lot of the industry was saying, by the year 2022, 10% of the cars are going to be talking to one another and connected to infrastructure and connected to one another. And this is going to be what's, sorry that it's so hot in here, guys. You guys okay?
Yeah.
Okay. This was what was going to happen. But it hasn't happened. And I think it's going to take just a little bit longer as well. Now, again, most of the cars that are manufactured today have some version of an automated feature. I mean, pretty much every car, even the most basic car, not even the expensive vehicles, they have some automated function in them. But I think it's going to happen, but it's just going to take longer than a lot of what the predictions were 6 or 7 years. I mean, it's inevitable that it's going to happen, and it's going to be clean as well. But the part that a lot of people are paying more attention to now is the fact that we need to make sure that vulnerable users don't get lost in the mix of this change and growth that's going to happen as well. That people who are walking, biking, and trying to get access to transit are not unsafe because of this heightened focus on what this future means. Can't ever forget about that. But it's going to happen. Excited about the potential that's here as well. Partnerships, I mentioned early on in the 5 priorities that partnerships are key to, it's one of 5 priorities, and it's key to anything that we do. Most state DOTs are mammoth organizations. They just are, like, regardless of whatever state you go to in this country, like Texas DOT, I think, for example, is like 14,000 people or 15,000 people. Cities, smaller communities, they're typically intimidated with going to the state DOT saying, hey, we want to do this project a little different. It's just a hard conversation to have because the brass, before you get to the Toks at Texas DOT or any other DOT, it just never happens. About a project, they're not going to sit down with, you know, some local official who's like, oh, now let's build the rails to trail and, you know, let's get more walking. It just, it's not a common part of the practice. But as a planner, someone who came up where the core principle, if you look at, anybody study planning? Anybody in the room? Oh, the planners? Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Couple classes.
One of the core principles of planning is this issue, engagement. Like, you can't go to planning school without understanding this issue. You can't, the job, the responsibility is not to try to build an edifice for yourself. To say, oh yeah, I did that. I built that bike lane. It's like, what did the community need? That's the first thing you're taught rather, in planning school. And that's like the focus to how the work is done. And so understanding that, coming to an organization that's the largest transportation department in the country, State Department of Transportation in the country, that's one of the things I wanted us to double down our efforts. Not that we didn't do engagement before, we did a ton. It's a part of the practice. But you can't do it just because the law says it. CEQA or NEPA, it has to be a part of who you are as an organization. And that's the place we're trying to get to, where partnerships, stakeholder engagement, it's just part of the norm. It's just how we do this. We're not going to do anything without making sure that people that we're serving are bought into the concepts and ideas, or it's their idea, possibly as well. So just to talk a little bit, I didn't go into some of the details on the 5 priorities or the 3 foundational principles, but if anybody has questions, I only have 2 more slides here. You can ask me about those principles, those foundational principles or the 5 priorities, or anything you want to ask. So when it comes to leadership, because I get this question often, it's like, well, you're seeing what people think I'm relatively young, like you're relatively young, but how do you get to a place where like you are living? And for me, you know, part of it, I believe, part of it has been the fact that I've paid a lot of attention to the sort of leadership quotient and how important that is to you if you want to make those advancements. I mentioned before about not getting so locked into, oh, I got to understand every single level of detail of, you know, the technical responsibilities I have, but rising up above that to connect with people. Now, some of these things, when you look around these things, some of these things, all of us were born with some of them. They're almost innate. But some of them, you have to work on. You have to spend the time to work on. I can look at this graphic, and I've seen this graphic a million times, use this several times. I look at this graphic and I can say, oh gosh, I still got work to do in this one particular area. Or 2 areas or 3 areas. But this is a self-assessment. Depending on what you want to do with your career and life, personal and professional, depending on what you want to do, this is self-assessment, and you have to think about it. You got to think about these things. Where do you lie? Where do these things lie for you? If you're wanting to do more and more and go far and make more impact, you got to grow these things. You got to spend a lot of time beyond the books. And that's what I've been fortunate to do. Some of them, again, are almost innate for me. And it's just, I don't even have to think about it. And I'm not going to go into specifics, unless you guys ask questions about which one. But some of them, they're just Nobody has to remind me. I don't have to work on it. They're strengths. But some of them, when I think about them, I start scratching my head. Oh, that's just not something that I enjoy doing or talking about. But if I want to rise to higher levels of influence and leadership, I don't know. So ask me any questions about these later. And we can talk about it. I'll close with this. In the responsibilities that I've had some really cool, unique responsibilities in my career over 20 years. And some of them I've run into a lot of roadblocks. I talked about the part of the country I lived in before where some of the things that I feel very passionate about, the political structure or leadership structure didn't buy into it. They didn't believe it. They're like, don't talk about that. Don't even bring that up. And when I ran into those roadblocks, sometimes I would recoil and just be frustrated and not want to do the work anymore. You're gonna have days like that. And some days I just buckled down even more and I was even more inspired. About 6 or 7 years ago, I found this quote and it's served as a source of inspiration for me since then. I'm a little weird and I go back and look at speeches on C-SPAN. Not that I have a lot of free time to do it, but I dial up speeches from C-SPAN from like the 80s and 70s. I was watching one and I should have been doing my work because I'm actually getting a PhD as well. I should have been doing work, but I was looking at a Bill Clinton speech in Louisiana in 1992. So almost 30 years ago. Don't ask me why I was looking. But I'm caught up by messages from prior leaders. Like, what were they thinking? Like, how did they do, how did they push things forward? How do you inspire people despite the wanting to just stay and not embrace change and courage to move forward? How do you get people to think about stuff like that? And this particular quote is one that's done that for me for I would say probably about 7 years. I'll read it real quick. Not that you guys in grad school, you can read. Real quick. Nothing is more dramatically apparent than the inadequacy of transportation in our larger urban areas. The solution cannot be found only in the construction of additional urban highways. Vital as that job is, other means of mass transportation, which use less space and equipment, must be improved and expanded. Perhaps even more important, planning for transportation and land use must go hand in hand as two inseparable aspects of the same process. This is not rocket science. It's not rocket science. This is pretty simple. When I read it, I had to go scrabbling this and say, okay, who in the world said this? Because this quote, this statement is very relevant to what we're doing today. If I said this, you would say, oh yeah, he heads up Caltrans. That makes sense. But this was 60 years ago. President Kennedy, and I addressed it to Congress. It was just in this same address in May of '61 that he said, by the end of the decade, we should have a goal to get man on the moon and return safely to Earth. Same May of 1961. So 60 years ago, you had a president saying, let's just not focus on building a bunch of highways. His predecessor, Eisenhower, got us down the path of building highways in this country. He said, look, that's a vital job. It's a huge responsibility. We need to build highways. But let's not forget about this. Let's not forget about things that use less space, micromobility. 1961, I promise you, they weren't around. Things that use less space and equipment. It's not just focus on cars, like things that can help people get around. And think about planning and transportation. like transportation and the way we develop, we were talking about density earlier, they go like that 60 years ago. So when I run into roadblocks today and people are like, no, you can't do that, we can't do that. This reminds me that this fight, I call it the good fight, it's been going on for a long time. And you guys are going to be fighting the same good fight. You're going to be fighting the same good fight. There's no point in time, I can promise you, that you're going to be able to stand up with a flag that says mission accomplished. It's just not going to happen. You're going to continue to find places along the way where you've got to push. Now, are we going to have wins? Are you going to have wins? Oh, absolutely. You're going to be successful, very successful, but you're also going to run into roadblocks. And remember, the good fight continues. You just don't give up. Thank you guys, appreciate it. So I want to have a discussion.
Inspiration there at the end. So we have folks here who are going to have some questions, and then we have folks online who are going to have some questions. So we'll start here, and then we'll jump over to the web.
Sure thing, absolutely.
Thank you. Do you want to choose them or I'll?
Oh, no, please. However you guys want to do it.
Go ahead.
First off, thanks so much for coming in today. My question is, you mentioned the foundational principles that Caltrans has.
Sure.
Safety, climate action, equity, but also that other DOTs across the country are not focused on those three things.
Mhm.
If they're discussing those things but not focused on them, what are they focused on?
Very good question. What's your name?
Noah.
Noah. Thanks for that question. So I was talking about the culture and the history of state DOTs and how sometimes it can be sort of very inwardly focused, and we've got a plan, we know what we want to do. A lot of state DOTs work with NPOs, regional planning agencies, to sort of help build out the future transportation network that they believe exists. Personally, anecdotally for me, I think we've already built out a majority of the highway system. I just don't think it should be a priority for us, again, to build additional urban, or some cases, probably some rural needs. But as far as the massive highway system, we've done it. I think it's 90% built, but there are a lot of states that are still heavily focused on, we got to build more highways. But beyond that, to give them credit, beyond that, the maintenance of that existing system is something that can't be taken lightly. I've asked for our team to put a dollar value on that 50,000. It's probably something you can't even really do, to be honest with you. I mean, it's in the hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. So you can't own an asset that's hundreds of billions of dollars and not maintain it. But the analogy that I like to remind us of, the leaders in this industry, what I like to remind us of is, if you compared it to a house, let's say you own a house that was $100,000 house. You have to maintain that $100,000 house and not be so focused on adding a swimming pool to the house, especially if you have a leaking roof. Our roof in transportation, so to speak, is leaking. We've got a system that needs a lot of upgrade. A lot of work needs to be done. We've got bridges that are in C and D condition, F condition. You got to maintain that. You can't be thinking about the pool. The pool, to me, is that building more highways. We don't need a lot of it, but that's where a lot, again, anecdotally speaking, that's where a lot of attention is going, is to building out more highways. But I have to give us a lot of credit, we, the industry, that we're also maintaining. But we've got to do more to maintain and become more multimodal as well along the way. Very good question, Noah.
Thanks. We'll go here.
What is a specific example where considering equity, climate, or safety has changed an action or policy that Caltrans made?
You want all three?
Just an example of any of those principles, like.
Is John, is he a future professor? He's giving me the grill, the lecture here. What's your name?
Nate.
Nate. Let me go with one particular project that I think, and I have to be careful how I talk about this, because I've been heavily quoted in the media about some things I said related to it. So I'll be careful. National press as well. So one example is the 710 corridor. Who's from LA here? Anybody from LA? Oh, that's surprising. Okay, nobody from LA. So one example is the 710 corridor. And you can look this up. You just look up, Caltrans and 710 corridor. There's a major freeway, north-south freeway in Southern California. You guys are hearing about the supply chain issues that the country's having and the backlog. So the main road that's going to help unclog that freeway system is the 710. There are two north-south corridors, 605 and the 710. We have on the plans in conjunction with LA Metro. LA Metro is it's a huge transportation entity in Southern California that's responsible for the highway system in the LA area. We, along with Caltrans, along with LA Metro, we've been planning for 20 years to expand the 710 corridor. Mind you, when the 710 corridor was built in the 60s and 70s, it gutted right through, as I was describing before, underserved minority communities mostly. We plan to expand it now 50 years after it was built, a 20-mile section of the 710 corridor. And we were planning to do the same thing again. Now, most of these decisions happened before me, and I'm trying to give myself an out, but if we caused harm and destruction when we built the original highway system by gutting through underserved and minority communities, we want to expand it 50 years later. We said, oh yeah, we're going to displace 300 more homes to make the road longer, but it's important for goods, then we should just do it, right? That's a fact. Don't think so. That's an untraditional decision to make. Now, is goods movement important? Are we right now in the middle of a national crisis as it relates to unclogging Long Beach and LA, two busiest ports in America? Number 1 and 3. LA is number 1, Long Beach is number 3. Yeah, we are. We're in the middle of that. But you got to keep in mind people who've lived, families who've lived in this particular corridor for generations. And we can't just say, oh, because for the greater good, which is what we always go to, for the greater good, we need to just blow this highway up again, widen it. And so, yeah, they're going to be, it's going to be some shrapnel. There's going to be some people who are impacted. And so, yeah. So made a decision, not solely, because I don't make these decisions solely on myself. There's so many other entities, the California State Transportation Agency, the CTC, a lot of us said, look, that's not the direction we're going anymore. I probably made the first public comments on it, and it caused a stir. Like it kind of blew up in the public sphere a little bit that I would make those statements. But my statement was something along the lines of, this project is not in alignment with the direction that we're going. From a climate standpoint, widening highways is not fitting. From an equity standpoint, because those folks are Hispanic or African-American, people who are lower income. How is that an equitable decision for us to say, oh yeah, we'll just find another place for you to live? Because we're gonna, is it safer to do that as well? Those three things, traditionally, state DOTs, we're on a mission. We're going. We gotta blow this highway. We gotta widen this highway. We gotta do it. And so taking a step back and saying, we're gonna do this project, but not how it's being planned. We have to do something because this is the heaviest freight corridor probably in the entire United States. More trucks probably on 710 than probably any other freeway in the country.
It is, other than the couple coal hauling roads, it is the heaviest truck traffic in the country.
So we've got to do something, but not in that format to the detriment of, is that a hard decision for a $5 billion project? One project, $5 billion? It's a huge decision. But it's a great example of how the thinking is different within an organization on most people. Very good question. Nate?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Nate.
All right, next, I'm kind of working my way back.
James?
So I really appreciate that one of the foundations is to create like partnerships and foreign outreach. But I just want to know what kind of factors might limit Caltrans' ability to undertake engagement activities, like, for example, funding or like not enough staff or like inadequate communication channels, things like that. What are some roadblocks to this kind of engagement?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think generally speaking, in an organization that's very technically inclined and very quantitative in its approach, having measures around something that's so sort of soft skill focused, it's just not kind of the thing that organizations like ours do. I mean, this is not. Again, not if you look at CEQA, the state environmental law, if you look at NEPA, the federal environmental law, it all has milestones for you to hit to like, go talk to the people. And that's what big engineering organizations do. Okay, now it's time to go talk to people. It's when you're like building a partnership, it's like an ongoing relationship. It's not about like, it's not transactional. I was like, oh yeah, now milestone 1. That's what we tend to do. But to the heart of your question, I think there are pluses and minuses for what's happened with the virtual world we live in today. One of the pluses is that now we communicate that way. I mean, a bunch of the meetings, 75% to 80% of the meetings I have on a daily basis, they're on WebEx or Zoom. And we engage communities in the same format. We're trying to. But when we talk about the issues around equity, if I'm a single mother with 2 kids and 2 jobs, me trying to get my laptop out to have a meeting with Caltrans, that's not going to be on top of the list of things I'm trying to do when my kids have homework and I got to clock into the next job. That's an ongoing challenge, even if it was in person as well. So just being able to be flexible, the idea that I want to eventually encourage and have us implement at Caltrans is, and it's just hard in a COVID environment, but it's going to where people are naturally without creating a specialty. What we tend to do is say, oh yeah, at the Davis so-and-so room, we need everybody to come out to come have a special meeting on Highway 80. What I encourage and what we implemented when I was in Tennessee, that what we started doing was a new thing called Request a Planner. Where we had a website set up where you could actually type in your organization name and email and say, I want your planner at the DOT to come to me. And we would actually send our planning staff out to a meeting at Burger King, like the most random places. And they'll show up and say, yeah, here's what we're thinking about for your community as far as transportation goes. So things like that where it's a neighborhood association meeting. And they're already going to have a meeting and they just add you to the agenda and you go to them instead of saying, where did DOT become to us? So that kind of thinking, it's flipping the idea of engagement on its head. Good question.
Back in the right, and we'll come back over here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. But in this country, you have these principles and like it makes me feel that I'm in the right space for what I feel. But also I really got a question about the partnership aspect. And I wanted you to expand maybe if that partnership was also part of how the planning process of the strategic plan was built, and if the community across the state was able to get involved during the strategic plan and get involved in picking the priorities and the principles.
Yeah, thank you. What's your name?
Carolina,
Katarina?
Carolina,
Catalina. What country?
Colombia.
Colombia. Okay, thank you. Very, very good question. So more along the lines of partnerships and engagement again. So those two documents I mentioned, two separate approaches in getting them done. One very sort of inwardly focused, and the other one sort of outwardly focused. The strategic plan could use a little bit more public engagement, but it's more about how the team is going to do it, if that makes sense. Like, what are we saying we believe in as an organization? So things like, pride in our work, safety. Those are some of the things that came out from it. Could that use a little bit more external input? I think so. But it was mostly the challenge that I had for our team with an organization with more than 20,000 people is, how do we make sure that it's not Toks that's dictating what we're going to do? Like, it's not about me. It's like, how do we make sure that every level of the organization, assistant directors, deputy directors, managers, it's a huge organization. How do we make sure that everybody feels like, oh, I know what those three things are. I had input in it. Like, it's a part of them, not just something the guys in the suits, the guys and the gals in the suits say. So, but the other document, the other one, CTP 2050, that one's a public document. It's outwardly facing. That particular document, the way we went about developing that, and it got finalized in a COVID environment. But the way we did that was we worked through local organizations and partner organizations. Again, in subsequent years, that could be different. But essentially what we did was we worked through NPOs. Are you familiar with NPOs? Sort of NPOs, RTP. The other, this is an interesting place to hang out. Interesting noises. We work with our partner organizations to put it together, not so much the lay public person. So Catalina, you would not have gotten a call from Caltrans for input, but the people who represent you where you live, like the planning organizations at the city, county level, those are our partners that we engage to help put something like this together, because they're supposed to be your voice in the plan. Now, could that change to include more just lay person involvement? I think so. I think it's hard in a state with 40 million people. But yeah. And by the way, there was all kinds of online stuff. You could go online and we publicized links you could go to and comment. But that direct engagement was with partner organizations. Good question.
Had his hand up 6 times the jump. No, that's you, sir.
Thank you so much for the really inspiring presentation. I wanted to ask, previously in the past, not too long before you started your term, there's been a kind of a reputation of Caltrans amongst advocacy groups that Caltrans stands in the way of complete streets and pedestrian safety. And how do you feel like you want to during your term, how do you feel like you want to reverse this reputation and work with these advocates?
Yeah, that's a huge question. Really meaningful question. I think it's sort of outlined in some of the things that we saw early on. I'm being intentional about making sure that the team that we built, that the people that surround me and that surround our district leadership. We have, Caltrans is made up of 12 districts. And each one of those is almost like a state unto itself. They have their own directors. But those directors report up to me. So making sure that the leadership team that I have and the leadership team that's existing throughout the state, whether it be San Diego, Orange County, up north in Eureka, wherever they are, they've got that same mindset about what we need to be doing for transportation on those 3 foundational principles. So whenever I have a meeting, an executive meeting, it looks almost like this room as far as the leadership. There's 30, 40 people in the room. We meet once a month. Every single one of those meetings once a month, we cover those 3 things. A meeting doesn't go by. Equity, climate action, safety. That's like, again, foundational to what we're doing. But I think that reputation that you mentioned, what's your name, by the way?
Staley.
Staley? Okay. That reputation is warranted. I think it's warranted. Some people would argue it's not fair. Could argue that. But we have in the past not been so embracing of ideas along things like complete streets and being more multimodal. And again, that's part of why when a new Governor Newsom, when he came in and said, remember his background, former mayor of San Francisco, walkability, bikeability, a big part of San Francisco, if you're ever there. He comes in and says, that's going to be one of the things I want to focus on. I was fortunate to be one of the leaders in the country on this issue. And yeah, he asked to help come and serve in this, partly because of that issue. Yeah, very good question.
Let's take one off the web.
Okay. Someone is asking, what kind of daily tasks, oversights of major projects, setting policy directives are part of your daily responsibilities of being the director of Caltrans? How do you manage such a large organization?
That
Is the question.
exactly. That question is assuming that I'm doing a good job. That I am managing. My assistant was messaging this morning. She said, "You just have way too much going on." So this is the 3rd speech I'm going to do. Too early this morning. It's a lot. I'm going to LA in the morning, and I can't even begin to talk about what next week looks like. I mean, it's a lot. But you know, when I was coming, a lot of people, because I came from a state where the DOT was 5,000 people. And I was one of the number 2. I was the number 1. So 5,000 compared to 22,000. A lot of people were saying, boy, that's just unmanageable. Like, how are you gonna handle your day-to-day? And you know, one of the things I love about my culture, where I grew up in Nigeria, people speaking like proverbs and parables a lot. John knows this. And there's one that's that's common in English as well, and it's like, you know, how do you eat an apple? And the common saying is one bite at a time. Same thing in the work that you do. You have to learn to like put things in compartments and hit each one of those compartments along the way. Are you ever going to be great at all of it? No, it just doesn't happen because there's just not enough time in the day. I probably sleep 4 to 5 hours a day because I'm actually in working on a doctorate degree as well. So at 10 o'clock at night, I'm doing research. So I leave work at 7 o'clock, 7:30 sometimes, and barely grab a bite to eat. I have a daughter and a wife and a son, and they have needs that I need to be able to engage with them. And so there's barely enough time. But to myself, Toks time without like work or something like that, it may be 20 or 30 minutes in a day. I mean, it's, yeah, my hours are mostly spent either dealing with things related to work, school, and family. So I was asked to eat early on, and I was like, food? It's a foreign idea. I just don't have a lot of time, but very, very good question.
Let's take one more from the audience here, and I reserved the last question for myself. Let's go here. There's your green mask.
Yes. A few years ago, when motor companies sided with the Trump administration to weaken the country's vehicle fuel efficiency standards, Governor Newsom stated that he would use the state of California's state vehicle fleets to try to punish some of these companies such as Toyota or General Motors who sided with the Trump administration. To what extent were you involved then, or to what extent did that threat actually, did he follow through on that threat, and to what extent was Caltrans involved?
Are you a reporter? You're an embedded report. What's your name?
Timothy.
Timothy, thanks for the question. Fortunately, my answer for you is not going to be pleasing because I know a lot about the topic, but I wasn't heavily involved. And so that's good for me. That I can't tell you I was heavily involved, so you can ask me more. But yeah, I'm fully aware. Are you familiar with CARB and CEC, California Air Resources Board and California Energy Commission? Those two entities. Those two entities have more of the responsibility over those issues than Caltrans. We're more the system responsibility, those sort of bigger sort of environmental leaning policies with the manufacturing industry, the auto industry. It's more CARB and a little bit of CEC as well. So not direct involvement, but was I aware of those discussions and a part of some of them? I was. I can't go into detail on some of what those things are, but yeah, no, I know all about it. And look, as soon as I need to be careful with what I tell you about this, but as soon as a lot of the industries, they're sticking their hand in the wind to see which way the wind's blowing on political issues. And I'm probably a little too principled to do some of that type of work. Maybe I will one day in the future, but I'm extremely principled in the fact that if you're saying you're committed to something and you believe in something, you ought to do it, regardless of what the politics that is going on in DC or wherever. Because there were prior commitments on this issue. And the political wind changed and said, oh, yep, we're now on this side, we're not doing that. And by the way, a new president comes in and boom, we're back on the side where I'm not going to go further, but look, because I don't want to get myself into it. You have to be principled. The organizations that are amazing in this country that people want to work for, that people want to go to, are those organizations that say, look, do we change our position on certain issues? Sure, but we're very principled. These are things we believe in out there, at the core and the heart of how we run our organization. And it's not about which way the political wind is going. It's like, no, you guys heard about the guy who gave his employees $70,000, like the minimum pay. You guys hear about that?
Yes.
The guy was like, look, every single person in the company is going to make at least $70,000. Oh, you guys ought to look this up. This happened like 2 or 3 years ago. CEO of a company said, the minimum pay for anybody that works is going to be 70. I don't care what you do.
That's not an arbitrary number. That's
No.
to support a family.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Minimum number.
Exactly. There was method to the madness, if you know. And people were just showing me, oh, are you crazy? You're nuts. You know, you gotta have tears and you're gonna go bankrupt. And it's like, no, I believe in this. I think that, and by the way, that's gonna be my salary as the CEO as well. To me, those are the companies that shoot through the roof and through the moon. He, despite being just eviscerated in the media, he stuck to his guns. The company is like quadrupled in sales, and I can't remember all the details.
500%. 500%. They grew 500% in a matter of 3 years every year.
It just happened 3 years ago. And with a decision like that, where everybody's like, look, you're gonna go broke. You're gonna file for bankruptcy. But sticking to principles and saying, look, I'm a climate company. We're a tech company or auto company that believes in these issues. I don't care what's going on. I don't care who's in office. This is the future. I'm going to stick there because I'm going to get in trouble. Yeah.
So I'll ask the last question. It's equally difficult than to that one, and but it's the good fight. And it comes right out of the quote, and that is the land use. You know, Caltrans has a planning department. You're trying to anticipate and respond to transportation needs, but the land, you have zero control over the land use. Thoughts for how to fight the good fight?
Oh wow! You can tell that this is the professor. I was asking the last question here. Yeah. So in most states, To John's question, in most states, this issue is handled completely at the local level. There are a few states like Maryland, for example, that has something, there's a state planning entity that's responsible for urban growth boundary that limits growth in certain areas. But there are very few states where this issue has any responsibility at the state level, completely autonomous to local government. I think as we do our work in the transportation space, like the president said 60 years ago, we have to continue to think about how the mix of mobility and land use work hand in hand. One of the ways, for example, is, and there are multiple examples to think about this, but one of them is encouraging and funding things. I was trying to look around here to see if there's anything like essentially what this development is. Actually, if we think about it, encouraging development like this and supporting it. So
incentivizing.
yes, incentivizing TOD. You guys know transit oriented development. So even though we don't run transit agencies, we don't run them, don't operate them, don't have administrative staff there, but I can support it. In the bio, you heard there are more than 300 transit agencies in California. So how are we supporting transit, like with the design of our roadways and incentivizing development that encourages transit-oriented development? So we just have to do a better job of connecting the two. We can't just stay in this world all day. There are so many corridors in this state that when I drive on them, you could be in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and you're in Sacramento. I mean, it's your typical 5-lane state highway with curb cuts throughout it, where cars just zip in and out. There's no controlled access. There's nothing. And it's, got your cigarette store. I was on one yesterday, and this wasn't making me answer a question. And I was just like, if I got teleported to Tennessee right now, you would think I'm in Tennessee. I mean, no difference. And not far from the urban center. There's so much density opportunity along our corridors that if you built that way and transit buses could stop there, you have the ability to be able to hop on a bus without walking a long distance. I could just walk out of 5 stories, 4 stories, hop on a bus and get to my destination, or walk or bike. But we've sprawled our development so much, and we just need to encourage and incentivize this and make sure that they go hand in hand more, as the president said, as 2 inseparable aspects of the same process. Very good question. Thank you, Professor John.
All right, we've taken a lot of